Okay, good morning. I'm John Deeks, editor of Insurance News, and welcome to today's webinar, Decoding Compliance, the Future of Insurance Customer Care, brought to you by Guidewire and Insurance News. Now, there's no doubt that the compliance landscape is shifting, and it's critical for insurance professionals to fully understand this increasingly complex environment. It's not easy, but thankfully today I'm joined by three experts to help take us through the dual demands of the General Insurance Code of Practice and ASIC's Regulatory Guide 271 and how best to deal with them. James Cousins is Senior Director of Product Management at cloud platform Guidewire, serving in the global content team and based in Australia. James's team works with insurers to align product strategy, regulatory content, and operational workflows for Australian insurance compliance. Hello, James.
Good morning, John.
Good
Pleased
to
to
be
be
with
here.
us. Carol Ann Goff is Head of Professional Services and Customer Success for the Asia Pacific region at Guidewire, where she leads teams across Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. Bringing a wealth of industry experience to the role, Carol Ann is a strategic leader dedicated to ensuring Guidewire's customers successfully deploy and leverage cloud-based core systems. Morning, Carol Ann.
Morning, John. Morning, everyone. Thank you for the lovely introduction.
No problem. And finally, Paige Vincent is Chief Operating Officer at Hollard Insurance. Paige is a senior financial services executive with more than 20 years' experience in insurance. She has led several portfolio remediation and claims transformation programs and is chair of the Insurance Council of Australia's Consumer Advisory Committee. Hi, Paige.
Morning, John. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Thanks for joining us. One thing just to point out to everyone listening is that you will find a Q&A section towards the bottom of your Zoom window, and we encourage you to type in questions as you think of them, and then we'll tackle as many of those as we can at the end. Okay, James, let's start with you. Now, I mentioned the code, NRG 271, at the start there. It might just be helpful to listeners if you give a broad overview of those two documents and the standards they set.
Thanks for asking that question. This has been a consuming part of my life probably about the last 18 months, as we've looked into how to systemize the code of practice particularly, and more recently started looking at how we can best support insurers for RG 271. So the code itself, the code of practice itself, was introduced by Insurance Council of Australia back in 1994. So it's been around for a long time, but it's quite a living code. It's been updated several times, and it's about to go through another iteration, generally in response to more recent government inquiries. Whilst it's a voluntary code, most insurers do subscribe to it, and it's got quite rigorous oversight and enforcement by the Code Governance Committee, and they're assisted by a group within AFCA, particularly around the reporting and enforcement areas. The code covers a lot of areas. The main one that people are probably familiar with is what we call the time-based obligations. So an example of that is the regular progress updates every 20 days. But it also covers obligations to vulnerable customers and for those suffering financial hardship. RG 271, on the other hand, it is enforceable regulation, and it covers the responsibilities of not just insurers but all financial services licensees. And the focus is around receiving, managing and resolving complaints. It comes under the oversight of ASIC, and really it provides a guide on how insurers manage their internal dispute resolution processes. And the goal is to make sure that complaints are resolved before they escalate to AFCA for resolution. So a thing to note is really around the definition of complaint. It's quite broad, and it even includes things like social media. So if you make a complaint, you can make a complaint just by mentioning an organization's X handle if you make a post on X.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Now, can you outline the scale of the challenge here from an insurer's perspective, Paige?
Certainly. In addition to both the code and RG 271, we also have other regulations such as claims handling as a financial service under the Corps Act. We've got the Insurance Contracts Act, we've got the Privacy Act, and quite a few other pieces of regulation or legislation that we need to demonstrate compliance to. And I think if we don't think purposefully about how we manage all of those obligations, both in terms of compliance and service, it can be quite overwhelming for our people. We almost lose focus as to the point of all of this regulation. And so when you kind of bring it all back down to what is it all trying to achieve, it's about the minimum standards that the insurance industry should be delivering to customers, particularly at claims time when something has happened and we really need to support them. And so thinking about it from that perspective to go at the end of the day, all of that regulation, the code RG271 is all about getting better customer outcomes and making sure that we are delivering to a minimum set of standards. How can we remove some of that complexity and duplication to make it easier for claims people to do the right thing, but also make it easier for customers to understand the standards and the service that they can expect from their insurer at claims time?
Yeah, interesting to think of it from the customer's perspective, of course. So, James, meeting these complex demands requires a move away from manual and siloed processes.
Yeah, there's a few aspects about that moving away from the manual processes, because one of the challenges with the obligations is not just complying with them, but also demonstrating that you're complying. And there are a lot of obligations. So just as an example, when a claim is lodged, there's 5 obligations that kick off straight away that you need to make sure you meet. So you've got one around your claim decision time frame. You've got one around straight away. You've got 20 days to provide updates. You've got to outline the process, let customers know whether there's additional information required. There's a whole heap of things that kick off, and just by complying with one, completing one, that can kick off many more. So you definitely don't want to be sitting there going, okay, what's my next obligation that I need to be thinking about? What you want to be focusing on is how well am I servicing my customers? And if you have got all this automated and you know what triggers the obligations and you know how they're being met, one of the benefits of that systemized automated process is you almost get the audit trail for free. So for a well-designed regulatory and compliance process that's not looking at enforcing the process on the adjuster, it's actually looking at how do I help them by staying in the background. A well-designed process is actually going to capture all those details, so it's going to let I've met this relevant paragraph. I know when the obligation started. I know when it ended. I know whether I discussed extension with the customer. I know what triggered the completion and what closed it. So you've got all that information sitting there ready to be put into reports, and not just reports for compliance purposes, sending into AFCA for reporting, but you also have it as a team leader and as an organization, so that you can see, where are my problems, where are my bottlenecks, where am I, which lines of business are giving me the most problems, what type of claims are giving me those problems. So it doesn't just give you, the ability to, make sure you comply, but it also helps you understand your processes and how to improve them.
Yeah, brilliant. Now, it's not just about meeting the obligations, Carol-Anne, and moving on. Data gathered from these processes can actually provide crucial risk signals.
That's right, John. And I was actually going to follow on from James's comments there. I think the opportunity for us here is that we get so much business insight when we actually implement and respond to the compliance requirements really well. So whilst we get risk insights, we also get great insights into how efficient our business operation is, how effective our customer experience is, and I think signals very early, excuse me, that can actually help us improve our business performance more generally. So, we're moving to an environment where we've got continuous compliance, real-time monitoring, but that in itself provides really rich information that we should capture and use very well at every level of the organisation. So individuals in their day-to-day work will get insights that they can act on, which is great from a business and a customer perspective. Leaders can be looking at trends earlier, team leaders, contact centres, every level of management, and then right up to the executive, the insights that we can get around product performance, risk management, strategy. What are the trends that we're seeing? How do we use this information to really drive our business forward as well? So, whilst it might feel difficult to comply sometimes, I think the benefit and the value that we get out of it, if we think about it well and execute very well on it, there's tremendous value off the back of it. So I think that's something to keep in mind all the way through.
Yeah. And James, mandated timeframes that you mentioned earlier, that's just one aspect of the requirements. But how do we deal with more qualitative obligations such as utmost good faith?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thanks for that, John. I mean, utmost good faith, it really, like, it first appears in the Insurance Contracts Act, and it's referenced a couple of times in the Code of Practice. The first time it refers back to, it's sort of in reference to, you can see it's in reference to what's in the Act itself. And the second one is in relation to when it comes to sanctions, which is, if the insurer's acts were not in good faith. But the question is, what does that actually mean? Like, what does it mean to act in good faith? And it's really around mutual obligation. So the Act itself looks at the insurance contract as being, there's two sides and there's information that each side has which the other doesn't, which is important to them. So the acting in utmost good faith means that if you have some piece of information that the other party doesn't know, and it's important for the transaction of the business, then you need to make them aware of that. So from the insured perspective, it's making them aware that there were building like structural faults in the building before you took out the contract, things like that. When it comes to the insurance side, there's a few references to it in terms of good faith refers to acting in a timely manner, particularly when it relates to claims. So a lot of the acting in a timely manner is embedded into the Code of Practice in terms of the time frames to respond to particular events. So there are things you can do to actually start auditing to demonstrate that you are acting in a timely manner and and acting in good faith. But there are examples, and AFCA references this. In the code it says you have 4 months to make a decision, a liability decision on the claim. However, AFCA does refer to it's contextual. It doesn't take 4 months to make a decision on a glass breakage claim that is clearly covered. Now, the thing about that is that that's where automation really does come into its own. So where you have solutions which can check, do automated checks against coverage, can see that something is within the limits, can automatically order a glass contractor out to replace your glass, and can actually make all the payments. That's where system automation comes into its own. It takes care of actually completing all those simple things, so that adjusters can focus on the things which really need their time and attention.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, Carol Ann, James mentioned this earlier briefly, but the definition of a complaint is very broad these days, and it does include things like social media.
Very, very broad, which presents a whole new challenge and opportunity, I guess. The challenge is obviously how do you pick those up quickly, and as James said, triage them and respond to them in the appropriate way. And how do we understand what are major complaints, what are minor, what can we automate, how do we get things through the system very quickly? The more I think about this, companies that do this well, it can be a real competitive advantage, I think, in a number of ways. Having the capability and the technology to sense it, react, respond appropriately, I think is good from a brand perspective. It really provides a level of trust and transparency and good for business. I think it also means we're obviously meeting the compliance requirements effectively, and people see that. But again, I think it also gives us those insights into, products performing well and our processes performing well, and whoever can be the first mover to really make those improvements and drive that forward, I think if we look at complaints that way, which I think we always have in the past, we see complaints as they're really good insights into how well we're performing. Let's use that for good. But when it comes to social media, the channels there, the minor comment that can be made that is all of a sudden a complaint, how do we make sure we can pick up on that well? And it does fundamentally come back to the technology capability and integration and how we use and share data effectively across an organization. So this is really where technology, I think, comes into its own, and it is key to success in this area. But again, good investment used well can drive a lot of value from a brand and a competitive advantage perspective as well.
Mm-hmm. But compliance, it can't all be about technology, Paige. I mean, the tech is just one part, presumably, of a successful compliance culture.
Absolutely. I see to the points that Caroline and James made around the technology, it's absolutely an enabler to ensure that we are meeting compliance and, more importantly, being able to demonstrate and report on compliance. But at the end of the day, when you think about the code and RG 271 and the other pieces of legislation, it is all about driving better customer outcomes. Essentially, that is what government, regulators, consumer advisory groups, even as insurers ourselves, that's what we're aiming to do, is improve customer outcomes. And I think if we can get the basics right and automated through the technology, it gives our people the opportunity and capacity to really respond to the need of the customer. And that's when you start to see really great outcomes well beyond the compliance arrangements. And a lot of the regulation, or even some of the code commitments, is really responding to historically gaps in performance of insurers or gaps in consumer expectations and trying to address those. And I think there's an opportunity for us to use the data and insights that we are getting from the way that we manage and monitor compliance to continually challenge ourselves in terms of how we continue to increase the experience and improve customer outcomes, because it's not something that you can just set and forget. We know that society expectations of insurers and the role that we play continues to increase. So how we can actually use the technology, one, to automate some of the basics of compliance and really focus on customer outcomes, but two, how we start to use the data and insights to preempt where some of the gaps might be as expectations continue to increase. And we make the change as insurers rather than needing regulation or legislation to do that for us.
Yeah. I'm back to you, Caroline. How can we approach the future with confidence in this area when it's changing all the time? We've already mentioned the fact that the code is in the middle of a major rewrite, and regulators are also certainly not afraid to alter or bring in new standards and requirements.
Great question, John. I would say that we operate in a world of change now. This is one aspect of change that we have to get really good at managing as organisations and industries. So again, having the capability and the flexibility to do that well, to be able to do it quickly at the right cost. I think it's also, encouraging organisations to think about modernisation generally, enterprise-wide, because to be able to keep up, do this well, do it at the right cost, but with the right customer outcome, does mean we have to modernise in certain areas. And if we haven't already been doing that, it's probably the catalyst for that type of investment and that drive. It's interesting, I come back to a comment that Paige made. Look, this is all about good outcomes for the customer. And I think if we keep that in mind throughout, it should drive most of what we do. Any change, any decisions that we make going forward, you want to put the customer at the heart of it. So if we're doing that, and we're doing that consistently, we will get good outcomes here from a compliance perspective as well. But I think the things I'd call out would be, yes, we're in a world of change. Regulation compliance is one part of that. How do we do that well? I think it is good governance, change practices. I call it the wisdom of the crowd. How do you bring together people that can sense and see what's coming? How did we get ready for that? Prepare ourselves as best as possible. And then, design with that in mind, design with flexibility, agility in mind. And I think compliance is just one example of that. So again, it's organisational capability, and that's not technology capability. That's just how we lean into change and manage change and do that really well as it accelerates across all areas of our industry.
Great. At this point, I'm just going to pause to say to all the listeners, please do type in some questions. This is one of the best opportunities of these live webinars, is you can ask questions directly to our panel of experts. So get typing, guys. But in the meantime, I do have some questions. So James mentioned the obligation to respond within 20 business days on claims. Now, that's within the insurance code. After the 2022 floods, this particular obligation was breached tens of thousands of times. I think I'm right in saying. So what's going on there? Was it purely a manpower issue? And has the industry learned from that? Clearly breaches have, I believe, trended down, but we haven't had an event like the 2022 floods since then. So any panelists got views on that one?
Well, I feel, John, we need to touch wood on your comment about we haven't had a flood like 2020. Yeah. So please touch wood, everyone, because we don't want another one. Look, I think the outcomes from the Parliamentary Flood Inquiry were pretty clear in terms of it was a significant event. The industry did come under significant challenge, both from a resource perspective, a supply chain perspective, and certainly fell short of expectations, both from government regulators and community. I think there has been significant work since that time to really improve both event response, capacity, thinking differently about how we communicate to customers, and not necessarily just get stuck on the 20-day compliance, because in some cases that's actually not short enough, depending on the decision that you're making, and particularly if you have a vulnerable customer. And in other situations where, say, a customer's booked their car in for repairs, but they're not booking it in for another 3 months, calling them every 20 days to remind them that their car's booked in for repairs in 3 months' time is probably not value add either. So there has been a lot of conversations across industry around how do we make sure that it is meaningful communication at a point in time where it's important for the customer to know real time. And then how do we reflect that in the updated code and move away from a mandated timeframe to communication that is actually meaningful and relevant at that point in time. So that work is still underway. And obviously insurers have all been focused on ensuring 20-day compliance. But I do think that we can probably take it further and really rethinking that obligation and what we're trying to achieve, which is giving customers the information that they need at the right time, and how we can use technology to do that, how we do that in different channels to actually reflect the need of the individual customer, as opposed to treating all customers exactly the same way.
Can I add to that, Paige? I think it's just a really great summary and insight. And if we're clear on the problem we're trying to solve, we come back to that. What's the outcome that we're after? And the better informed we are, the better we can influence that and how we go about achieving that outcome. And I think the insights that we're getting through the data now, understanding what the customer need really is, then we can definitely step in and start influencing a little bit more from a really well-informed place, which is good, I think, very good for the customer, because they'll get the outcome that they're looking for, and good for the organisations in, okay, what's the best way, optimal way to deliver on that outcome, whether it be process, technology, etc. So going back to outcome, customer outcome, and how do we inform the best way to achieve that?
Yeah. Now, we'd probably need a whole separate webinar to tackle AI, but it's probably worth mentioning. So, whether that's in sort of collating those complaints on social media, or whether that's dealing with, the obligations around responding to claims. How big a game changer could AI be, do you think?
Maybe I can start on that. I mean, there's many places you can see AI being beneficial in the compliance area, and it's not it's more than just the obvious automation. There's a lot going on in a claim that an adjuster, a claims handler needs to know about. So even down to things like claim summarization. So being able to get a single hit on these are the relevant things you need to know about the claim, and these are the most sensible next things to be doing. And I think you can tie that into compliance, because as you bring all the compliance data in, you can also start getting information about, hey, these are the things where I think you're going to have the most trouble complying, and these are what's going to need your attention. And I think we've had a call, like a question come in online. We're talking about, how can we automate things like the compliance processes? And a great example is the 20-day. That was the example, the 28, the 20-day progress update. Before the update is due, you can get the summary. Basically, you can put together use AI to be able to not just do summarization for the adjuster, but you can also use AI to put together an update for customers and automate that process. I mean, I don't think I'd suggest straight away saying, yeah, just automate the update and send it off. You always want to have a human in the loop to validate what's being said there. But at least that takes the process away. It's more than just, it's basically validate where we're up to. Is it different from what we said last time? Is there something I need to add in there that I'm aware of? And then send it off. But at least you can, it takes away the constant thought of what am I going to tell the customer next. Yep, I've got the summary, I've got the information, I've got the code information coming in, I've got all my obligations, and I can let them know. The other area where AI can come in very strongly, and I think this is on both the complaints and the code side. On the vulnerability side particularly, it's that ability to look across the whole claim, look at all the communications that you're having, and look for signals that someone may be vulnerable, and then be able to bring that to an adjuster's attention and be able to say things like, okay, I think that this person has this vulnerability, and I recommend that these are the actions you take to confirm, and any actions you can take to support them. Same thing with complaints. Look across all your different communication channels, what's going on with the claim, and identify not just whether a complaint has been made, but also whether the conditions are ripe for a complaint to be made. So there's a lot of areas where AI can come into automating some of the compliance process and heading off potentially where some of the issues could be.
Interesting, yeah. Now I wanted to ask just briefly about enforcement trends as well, because some of our most popular stories this year, I should say, have been around insurers getting in trouble with either ASIC or the Code Governance Committee. Do you guys see a real trend in terms of, a cranking up of that enforcement?
Might be one for Paige.
For that one.
Need to lean into that one. I think, look, in fairness, I think the regulators are absolutely coming to the fore in terms of holding insurers to account to commitments and obligations and compliance arrangements that we need to meet. And I think ASIC in particular have published their focus areas for this year, which again focuses on complaints handling, claims handling, and pricing, and for all of the right reasons. They are there to protect the customer and make sure the industry is doing what it's supposed to do. So it is part of their requirement, and I think their remit. And historically, they have come under fire in the Royal Commission and in parliamentary flood inquiry. So I would absolutely expect them to lean in and start holding us to account.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe adding to that, when we talk about the industry, the role of third-party service providers in that now, and ensuring that everyone's playing their role and we're all clear on the role that we play with respect to compliance and customer outcomes. I think that's definitely increased focus and a big shift in the industry as we have more third-party service providers in the mix now.
Yeah. Excellent. We have got some listener questions rolling in, so I'll start going through them. What would be the impact of a major technology outage like the Cloudflare example on these systems and the industry's capacity to manage their compliance obligations?
Well, if we think about another new piece of legislation that's just coming, which is CPS 230, so all insurers have been doing a lot of work in terms of understanding business resilience as it relates to critical process. The claims process is absolutely a critical process, and we have plans in place that if we did have a technology outage or other outages that impact the resilience of that process, what our fallback position would be. And how we make sure that we can still be lodging claims and servicing customers despite those outages. I think in reality, I definitely couldn't sit here and say it wouldn't have an impact. I think things would be obviously slower because we lose a lot of capability and capacity if we were to lose technology. But there is still the base requirement of manual processes and workarounds that would still make sure that we are accessible to customers. That certainly would impact in terms of timeframes, I think is fair to say.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now you mentioned CPS 230 there. There's another question that mentions it. How does RG 271 interact with CPS 230 in practice, especially around operational incidents that become complaints?
Yeah. So I can't talk on behalf of all insurers because each insurer would have deemed critical processes slightly differently depending on their risk appetite and how they run their businesses. For Hollard, complaints handling is a critical process for us, so it does tie into CPS 230 and sits under that business resilience process. We have an entire ecosystem that sits around our compliance to CPS 230, looking at process health metrics, risk metrics, and also resilience metrics. And we use incident management and incidents raised to help understand the health of all of those different metrics and make decisions, improvements, changes off the back of it, and obviously have mapped all the way through to technology end to end through those value streams. So I think for 271 and 230, for Hollard at least anyway, it's complementary because it's all tied in together. I think it would be a little bit difficult if you hadn't determined that complaints handling was a critical process, how you would navigate those two pieces of legislation if you were determining them to be two separate issues.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, here's another one. What can we expect from ASIC following the upcoming publication of the IDR firm level data? How can we, financial firms, prepare ourselves for what's coming?
I think it'll be interesting because going back to Carol Ann's point earlier, the definition of a complaint is so broad, and I think there is probably inconsistency at the moment across industry in terms of how it's recorded, in terms of a dissatisfaction or a complaint, and how that nuance will be reflected in the publication with ASIC. So I think the first flush of it will be interesting just to see where the volumes sit and how everyone's interpreted the legislation and the definition of a complaint, but fully supportive of complete transparency and particularly the impact that poor complaint handling or delayed complaint handling can have on customers. So I think it'll be interesting at first to see the differences between insurers and how we can get consistency in terms of definition, recording, publication, and then what insights that we can pull out both at an industry level and also an individual insurer level in terms of the improvements that we could be making both through process, systems, technology, and the regulation itself to make sure that it is still fit for purpose and getting the desired customer outcomes it was intended to.
Yeah, yeah. Now, this one builds on what we already said about AI, but goes into a bit more detail. So could AI or other solutions play a role to help reporting some of the obligations? Insurers are implementing manual processes to ensure the obligations are being met, but this is pulling effort away from claims officers from their core work doing admin to ensure the reports are accurate.
Yeah, maybe I can jump in on this one. I think there's a couple of aspects there. It's not just, AI can help in a lot of areas, but maybe not everyone. I think part of the key thing about being able to report on your obligations is actually having the data there. So actually knowing what obligations you've had, which ones you've met, which ones you haven't met. If you haven't met them, have you got processes in place which allow you to review and actually look at potentially look at systemic problems? So there's a whole raft of things that technology can help with. I think on the AI side, I think the real strength of it is that ability to look across a lot of data sources and be able to synthesize that information into something which is quickly understandable. I mean, there is a lot of things going on, especially on a complex claim, and being able to have things drawn to your attention so that you can deal with them at the right time. That's going to be a strength of AI. I think on the other side, the data and reporting side, it really is important to be capturing that information, and that whole idea of moving away from manual compliance to automated compliance actually brings that data element in. So you're now starting to have some really detailed and clear data available that starts giving you real insights both into the way that your organisation is responding to your obligations, but also as more of the industry becomes systemised, that consistent level of data going back into the regulator, and you can see how the whole industry is performing against those obligations.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add it's the richness of the information that we now have, right? We're collecting so much information across these processes. I think AI gives you the tooling to get the insights faster, direct people's attention, as James said, to areas which they may not have looked at fast enough previously. But again, where's the human in the loop on key processes? How do we assess the risk of automation? That definitely a tool that equips people much better, particularly frontline, to respond in a much better way than potentially in the past. But again, how do we understand the risk and put the right controls in place around that? Use it for good and get the maximum value, because there's tremendous value there from AI if we understand how we want to use it across those processes and equip our people well. I think that the jobs and the roles, as we talked about, elsewhere, people are now getting different insights. They can actually operate in a different way. What does that mean to the skill set of those roles to help people perform in the way that they now can deliver the outcomes that maybe they couldn't before? AI is enabling that. So obviously lots of change to manage there and risk to manage as well. But great opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Another listener question here: what would ASIC consider a systemic issue under RG 271, and what level of recurring complaints is a red flag? Probably need to get ASIC on here, but anyone have a view on that?
I think a common misunderstanding with systemic issues is that there is a view that it has to be more than one. And in actual fact, it can be one instance, it could be one breach or issue, but it has an opportunity to have ramifications across multiple customers. And so I think bearing that in mind, depending on what the issue is in relation to complaints handling, it could just be one thing, but if it has the ability to impact multiple customers, or if it looks like it's a deficiency in a system or a process that is likely to impact multiple customers, that could be deemed a systemic issue. And obviously ASIC would investigate. AFCA have similar views in terms of their systemic issues team. So it is just one complaint that they may have seen through the EDR process, that they then have concerns that one instance could actually impact multiple customers, and that will trigger a review or investigation around that.
And I think the other thing too is to think about a single complaint is potentially the tip of an iceberg. So going back to, well, definitely you're having one complaint, because potentially there is a systemic issue. It's just that most people don't complain. So, it makes sense to actually, no matter what the complaint is, to always be looking, is there something deeper that's behind this? And again, this goes back to what Carol Ann was talking about, having the wealth of data available. So you can actually go back and say, okay, we've had this complaint. What were the conditions of that complaint? Can we find other areas which actually have those same conditions? And are we looking at a deeper problem that we need to address?
Brilliant. Yeah. The question here that came in, slightly different topic, but how can insurers proactively influence increasingly stringent regulations while also advocating for the best interests of the business, customers, and people? What strategies can insurers use to balance regulatory compliance, drive innovation, deliver faster, and maintain operational efficiency in this challenging environment? Quite a lot to cover there, but
it's a great question.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say, I'd just argue that balancing regulatory compliance is not really different from driving innovation or delivering faster. Like, there's no reason why they're in conflict. You know, being compliant can actually be something that drives innovation.
Mm-hmm. Paige, do insurers try to influence these regulations? Is that, I guess they have a view.
No, we absolutely do. So it's actually one area of the ICA that really leans into that on behalf of insurers, where there is new regulation being proposed. They will often do a submission on behalf of industry to try and influence to make sure that it is going to get the right customer outcome, but also not put additional unnecessary cost or burden on the insurer. I think we've got the perfect opportunity at the moment with the redraft of the code. Obviously, that is being watched with great attention from regulators, and depending on how we respond to that opportunity, that in itself will demonstrate how the industry is self-regulating, which is ultimately what regulators would want to see, self-regulation of industry, and that we are holding ourselves to account. So I think we are live at the moment in terms of influencing through the code redraft what future regulation or legislation could look like. And particularly off the back of the parliamentary flood inquiry, there are a number of recommendations that were similar in nature to some of the code redraft recommendations that came from the Code Governance Committee and the Code Redraft Committee as well. So I think, we absolutely have an opportunity to do that. We already do it exceptionally well through the ICA on big proposals. And obviously we've got the current code redraft underway that will absolutely influence future regulation or legislation for the industry.
Seems like it's going to be a fairly major change rather than just a few tweaks. ASIC approved, enforceable, and yeah, maybe a full rewrite rather than just a tweaking. Do you think that's what's needed? Because it could take a while.
Well, we have a very limited time frame. So the aim is that we do want to have the new code up and running, I think, from January 27, which means it is a very tight time frame to consider all of the feedback on the code. I have a personal bias to the code. I think it was an amazing step forward at the time that it was first drafted in terms of industry's commitment to customers and minimum standards. And obviously a lot has changed over that time. And even when you look at the current draft of the code, it doesn't quite make sense in the order because we've just kind of added things on every time we've redrafted it. So the intent for this current redraft is to simplify it, make sure that consumer protections are really well understood, and obviously hold ourselves to account that if we don't meet the code, that there are ramifications and consequences, not just from a code governance committee, but for consumers as well. So it is a massive piece of work. A lot of effort and energy is going into trying to get it right. And obviously we will engage with consumer advisory groups and ASIC on that redraft well ahead of January 27.
Great. Now we're going over time slightly, but there's one more question. Is there a more proactive role for automation at an early triage point in policy interpretation decision making at claim time? A lot of time and effort seems to be wasted in determining relevant policy provisions and whether exclusions might apply.
I would say yes, definitely. James, you want to
Yeah, yes.
jump in
Yeah, no,
there?
I was going to say, yeah, definitely. But I think the challenge is making sure that the policy is expressed in a way that can be understood at claim time. So there's a couple of things there. One is making sure that the policy itself, either it can be systemized in a way that can be read, so limits are passed through, the clause, the policy clauses are passed through, and the claim system can understand how to interpret those. But there's also other solutions which are in play as well, such as AI-based ones, where you basically pass through all of your PDS through through this process, and at claim time, it can actually interpret it can interpret the claim conditions against the whole PDS, all the terms and conditions, and with that, not wanting to blow Guidewire's horn, but the recently a recent purchase. I can't remember the name of the company. Could you remember it, Caroline?
Pro Navigator.
Pro Navigator. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I must be getting old. Pro Navigator is an organization that Guidewire's recently purchased, which does, those sorts of things, which basically use AI to interpret the more less systemized documentation. I mean, they're well-written, well-structured documents of PDS, but they can interpret those and provide that interpretation to the claims handlers at at claim time.
Great stuff. Well,
I think
I
it's
think anyone want to add anything before we wrap up?
I was just going to add one thing. I think the claims summarization opportunity there for AI is definitely an early area of focus and opportunity. I just think looking at the questions as well, I think it just highlights the importance of across the industry, but with suppliers, with partners like Guidewire, with the insurers, with the regulators. These are complex problems to solve, but there's technology capability now that will enable us to do that faster and better. But effective collaboration and understanding the problem to solve the outcome that we're looking for, the more aligned we are on that, I think the more effective we can be and the faster we can go, and the greater flexibility, we can provide the industry as well.
Great stuff. Well, that is just about all we've got time for. So thank you so much, James, Paige, and Carol Ann, for your time today. An excellent analysis. And thanks for everyone for tuning in. And we'll see you again soon.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.